Today we commission the instruments.
She's coming, I know we've been through a lot, but just wait.
Another successful shakedown cruise.
Days to come and carry us like wind in our sails.
Last time we discussed our shakedown, we took you to the south coast of New South Wales to the port of Ulladulla and the beautiful Rennie's Beach. Before we can set off for another shakedown, we want to show you our Bimini enclosure, and we have a few jobs to do, as usual. You might recall some time ago we redesigned our entire Bimini setup, and this necessitated new stainless steel frames, new clears and new shades. The Bimini enclosure, the cockpit, is a really important aspect of living on a 42-foot traditional yacht. By having a flexible arrangement of clears and shades, we can utilise this area summer and winter, day and night, and it effectively makes the boat feel bigger and more like a home.
You like the clears?
Soon we'll be giving you a tour of Kikamalu, and we'll go into our design of the clears and shades and how they go together, and also how this design will work when we're sailing the boat.
So we've got a fuel transfer pump that transfers fuel from remote fuel tanks into this main fuel tank back here, which is a stainless steel tank that holds 155 litres. And I think because of infrequent use, the pump seizes. So I'm going to remove the pump and see if I can get it moving again. First thing is to disconnect the lines that connect the remote tanks to it. Okay, so that's one line off. I'm just going to tape the line up to stop any diesel fumes from spreading. The tank that this leads to is actually empty, so, and it's also lower than this height, so it can't flow anywhere, so there's not really any great risk except just to keep the fumes out of the boat. So here's the outlet from the fuel pump that goes into the top of the fuel tank. The tank's not too full, it's only about half full, so it should be fine. We're not going to actually move the boat anyway until we reinstall all this stuff.
When we bought Kikamalu, she had a 155 litre main diesel tank and two 40 litre remote tanks. Because we like to keep things as simple as possible, we considered removing the fuel transfer system remote tanks and to just use jerry cans instead to carry extra diesel. In the end though, we decided that it was worth keeping the transfer pump for two reasons. Firstly, it gives us the option to convert one of our water tanks into an extra fuel tank if needed. And secondly, we could incorporate the fuel pump if we decided to add a fuel polishing system.
Okay, we're halfway there with the fastenings that hold it on. So the next thing now, we start looking at the electrical connection.
My shit. I don't wanna be a junkie, baby, but I know you've got it. Oh yeah, oh no, oh baby.
There's signs in here that the positive cable has overheated a bit, so it's about time that we did this.
Oh yeah, won't you say
I'll just strap this to the other hose to make sure it doesn't fall down too low and cause any leak. Even though the tank's empty, there might be some fluid.
Just wanna be okay.
So what are you doing now, Jimmy?
We just reinstalled the diesel fuel transfer pump and the electrical connections to it. So I'm going to open the valve, the supply valve from one of the remote tanks in the starboard cabin.
Yep.
The outlet that goes into the main tank at the top, and we've got power. I'm going to power up the transfer pump, and hopefully we'll see the fuel shooting up there into the tank if all goes well. So let's give it a go.
In one of our last episodes, we removed our fridge to replace the insulation and to encapsulate it in fiberglass so we don't get condensation. We worried that adding the fiberglass would make it too big to fit, so we were facing the prospect of having to modify the opening, which we were dreading because it would mean cutting away at the beautiful teak that forms the enclosure. We needn't have worried.
Oh my God, Martin, you are a master.
What a terrible thing for you to do. What an awful thing for you to say.
Meanwhile, Jim and I and Lucy continue our work while Martin pulls a vacuum on the system prior to regassing it with refrigerant.
Well, I know some people that got a little less than nothing, yeah, but still find some to spare. And other people got more than they could use, but they don't share. And some people got problems, man, they got awful complications. Other people got perfect situations with no provocation. But don't we just gotta give a little time? Maybe give a friend a call instead of making him confused. What a terrible thing for you to do. What an awful thing for you to say.
Today we commission the instruments.
What a terrible thing for you confused. What a terrible thing for you to do.
Marty Anderson from Anderson Marine came out with us to commission the recent B&G instruments install. This involved taking the boat out and calibrating the various components to suit our boat and this particular installation. It took about an hour and a half and required a steering of the boat in the cardinal directions as well as a few slow turns of the boat to check and adjust any magnetic deviation on the electronic compasses and to check that the wind speed and direction were correct. Calibrating the boat speed was easy, as the B&G chart plotter has a function that calibrates and adjusts the paddle wheel transducer speed to the known boat speed as measured by the GPS. And having completed all the calibrations to our satisfaction, we were now ready for our next shakedown.
They said I run like a stubborn tide, unstoppable, untamed and wild. But a brave face isn't brave, I've learned. And as I searched for wisdom, I remember your words. You told me, sing for the wind, my love, fear not for tomorrow. 'Cause love's a journey of a lifetime, and where you finish isn't where you start. And where you finish isn't where you start. So tomorrow, needn't worry me. And though the path be untraveled, at least I'm free.
Say you ended up by mistake pressing this again and you go into the settings.
Yeah.
You want to go back, you just hit the cross there or the cross here.
Right.
Either way, gets you back. The more you do it, the further out it gets you. If you have a man overboard, right,
Yeah.
there's a couple of ways to do it. One way is if you hit that,
Yeah.
see that little red cross?
Yeah.
Hit that and then go back out, and it provides, it makes that the waypoint. So it
Right.
creates a man overboard
Okay.
waypoint, and you'll always know where that point is,
Right.
and you can go back to it.
Okay.
Where you finish isn't where you start. You told me, sing for the wind, my love, fear not for tomorrow. 'Cause love's a journey of a lifetime, and where you finish isn't where you start. Your where you finish isn't where you start. Where you finish isn't where you start. And where you finish isn't where you start. And where you finish isn't where you start.
Another successful shakedown cruise. How far will we shake ourselves down? That is the question. One thing that was interesting was at one point I didn't realise that the autopilot was off. And we were just ploughing along. We had the wind on the beam about 12 knots. We were doing about 6 knots boat speed. I thought the autopilot was on, so we were just plugging away for about, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. I went down below and did a few things, came back up, and then I realised the autopilot's actually off. So the boat was tracking beautifully, just with the main and the jib trimmed, and it was just steering beautifully. No autopilot, just plugging along. And I think long pedal helps a lot with that. So,
And it was pretty wishy-washy.
yeah, there was a lot of swell. There's about 2 to 3 metres of swell, a bit of wind chop, so there's a bit of sort of boat movement going on. But overall, the boat just sailed the wind, which was really nice to see. I mean, it should do that, but it's just nice to see it in action, I suppose. So you know that you're not totally reliant on the autopilot 24/7.
I just wanted to tell you from my perspective, I got a little seasick. There were a number of factors involved, I think. Firstly, I began to feel unwell when Jim was showing me the instruments. Secondly, it was a fairly large and messy swell running against the outgoing tide. And thirdly, when Jim was hoisting the mainsail, I tried to point the boat to windward by looking down at the instruments. Not a good idea. But before I got too sick, I took a tablet. It worked quickly, gave me a bit of a dry throat and a woozy feeling, which meant Jim was down a crew member. Luckily for Jim, he had Lucy.
Hermit crabs and calorie shells crushed beneath his feet as he comes towards you. He's waving at you. Lift him up to see what you can see as he begins his focusing here, aiming at you. And now he has cutaways from memories and close-ups of anything that he has seen or even dreamed. And now he's finished focusing, he's imagining lightning striking seasickness away from here.
Next time, Jim designs and creates a retractable frame for our new solar panels, and we take a trip deep into Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park to raft up with friends.
You've barely even tasted anything remotely close to.
Lucy says if you like this video, buy her a bone by subscribing, liking and sharing. And if you want to see more, don't forget to press the bell button. If you have any comments or questions, she'd also love to hear about those.
Driftwood floats after years of erosion. Incoming tide touches roots to expose them. Quicksand steals my shoes. Clouds bring the F-stop blues.